Greetings, my name is Jessa McLean, and you're listening to Blueprints of Disruption, a podcast that encourages folks to challenge the status quo, hold the powerful accountable, and of course, disrupt. Our next guest spends most of his days doing exactly that. Yves Engler has been a staple in Canadian politics for years and has never really tread lightly. In the past 16 months, he's been best known for being one of the only journalists out there pressing leaders of all the parties about their positions on Palestine. And of course, you may have heard his name even more frequently in the past week or so, following his arrest by Montreal Police. Yves isn't the first arrestee we've heard from here on Blueprints. Our regular listeners will recognize some of these tools of suppression. But there's also plenty that sets his arrest apart from the other activists we've interviewed. This was a brash move by Montreal Police and by the Crown, who seemingly acted at the behest of one of the more vile social media personalities out there who's working alongside a conservative candidate. While Yves shares just how he coped with all the twists and turns in his case, he also is incredibly reflective of the systemic issues related to incarceration. This case also garnered a lot of attention globally. At the end of this episode is a folk song written about the occasion, and that wasn't all. Between the thousands of letters and jail support and all the other forms of solidarity, Yves felt it. And he shares how he thinks it impacted the outcome we were all hoping for. So sit back and soak up some of these shocking details of the latest case of Zionist Lawfare being deployed against Palestinian solidarity work and failing epically. Welcome back. In case anybody doesn't know, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, Yves Engler, Georgia, Montreal-based author, activist, been involved in mostly international solidarity kind of activism for, 25 years. Some student union politics, some anti-corporate globalization movement stuff back 25 years ago, but mostly sort of Palestine, Haiti, anti-war kind of writing and activism.
We've leaned on your writings and your work a few times for this show, so I'm guessing most of our audience has benefited from your writings before. Certainly the Canadian state has not. I imagine what you write about played a large part in what happened to you. In case you missed it, Yves spent 5 days in jail, and why he was in there is open to interpretation. The police will likely tell you one thing, Yves will tell you another, and everyone else will have their own opinion. But Yves, what were you charged with? What did the police initially come to you and say you had done so wrong that they were going to haul you in?
Yeah, the police called me Tuesday of last week, and the police inspector called me and said that they were going to be charging me. She asked me to come in the next day because they wanted to charge me with harassing Dalia Kurtz, who is a well-known anti-Palestinian media personality. And the harassment was responding to her posts on X. And as I wrote about immediately, guilty as charged, I responded. I referred to her as a fascist, to genocide Dalia, and other kind of snarky political responses. And I've never met her. I've never emailed her, never messaged her, never talked to her. I don't even follow her on X. She could have blocked me. About 7 months ago, she said, she made this declaration, quote tweeted me from a tweet 5 or 6 days earlier that I'd posted and said, "Stop harassing me. This is your last chance. You are harassing me. I am feeling threatened." She did this on X. And as someone posted right away saying, "Why don't you block him? That's a mechanism on X. If you don't want him to respond to your messages, block him." She was obviously setting up the terrain for a legal or policing battle at that point. And we know that she did then go to Montreal Police. Then I publicized this. I wrote about it. I wrote an article for my site, posted it on different platforms, and there was an action alert.
We shared it widely.
Yeah, calling on the police not to, to drop the charges. And thousands of people, by the next morning, thousands of people had emailed the police inspector. The police's response to my writing about it and this action alert being shared was to basically throw the book at me or double down. And now they said I was harassing the police. And they brought in 4 different charges saying I was harassing the police. They come in the next day to be arrested for harassing the police and for harassing Dahlia, alleged.
The police in general or a specific officer?
This specific officer that was the...
Because we probably harass the police all the time. All of us do. And all of us make snarky comments to Zionists on the internet. I don't know how many people I've called a fascist. I don't have your profile, but this is not unusual behavior. I mean, or criminal behavior.
It's not unusual behavior. And we now know that the police actually initially interviewed Dahlia in the summer and opened a file and looked, I guess, at my ex and whatever evidence she brought them, and then closed the file. That the Crown told us this at court. And then there was pressure brought by Neil Oberman, a Conservative Party candidate here in Montreal, a lawyer. His law firm sent a letter, and then they reopened the file, and then 2 months later I was charged. But the actual main thing here is that I didn't go to jail for anything to do with the charges against me. I went to jail because the Crown, or sorry, the police initially, and this right away, it was told to my lawyer on the Tuesday. The initial inspector said it would take 15 minutes. I would go to the station when it was just a Dahlia Kurtz charge. I'd go to the station. They would charge me. They would arrest me. Presumably, I would do my fingerprints, and they would let me go if I agreed to the conditions. They told my lawyer, she didn't tell me this initially, but she told my lawyer that when he called after she called me, that the condition would be that I don't talk about Dahlia Kurtz. In effect, I don't talk about the case. Of course, was absolutely unwilling to agree to not talk about the case. And the condition could be for, the Crown could drop the charges 2 weeks later. So the condition could have only been for 2 weeks. But it also most likely could have been for a year or however long until the whole case got dealt with.
Oh, yeah.
I guess it could even be 2 years or, So I was absolutely unwilling to accept that condition. So effectively, I spent 5 days in jail because initially the police and then the Crown wanted to impose a condition that said that I couldn't talk about the case. And I should note that once we actually had the bail hearing late on the Monday, after presenting myself at the detention center on the early Thursday, we didn't even actually have to present our defense. Because as the Crown was making the argument for this condition, the judge, in part, I think because there was so much solidarity, so much support in the courtroom and more broadly, the judge basically, got their head around what was actually being asked by the Crown, which was to just completely muzzle me. So you could have a situation where this pro-genocide influencer is able to convince the police to abuse state authority on behalf of Israel's genocide, and then the person who's being targeted is not even able to respond publicly to this. So it was very obviously an infringement on free speech, but an infringement on free speech in service of genocide. And so the judge basically forced the Crown attorney to concede to what I had agreed to immediately. I was willing to say right away on the Tuesday that I would not respond to Dahlia Kurtz on social media anymore. Effectively, what I did was I just blocked her myself. Something she could have done 7 months ago. I blocked her myself. So now she won't appear in my feed.
Well, she could. The way X is designed, there's folks that still end up on my feed even though I've blocked them. So there's just, you wouldn't go after her directly.
Exactly. So I was willing to do that right away. And the police and the Crown, they abuse their power. Obviously, it's also a big, it's really costly to put someone in jail. If you from the standpoint of public resources, that whatever thousands of dollars that was spent on this would have been much better used for all kinds of lots of people who could use a place to stay in the cold, and there's lots of people who could use counseling and all kinds of other more socially useful things. But basically, the police, I think obviously Dahlia Kurtz and Neil Oberman did all this because they saw me as a threat to Canadian complicity in genocide. I don't actually think the police initially were doing this with what we call sort of a broader political intent. I think actually, funnily, the inspector was maybe just kind of like, oh, I got pressured from this like law firm that's this Conservative Party candidate. I'm just kind of like move this file along. The Crown might drop it, or just kind of. That's I think possible, more likely of their initial reaction. But then the police's reaction to me writing about it. Now that's a whole other thing. Then it was basically we're asserting our authority. How dare you? How dare you challenge, our authority? And the other part, and I don't think that they would have been able to. They wouldn't have brought 4 charges unless the hierarchy of the policing structure wanted to. Oh, okay, now we have an opportunity to make Engler's life difficult, or he's been annoying, or how exactly they formulate that themselves. And so then that becomes the institution of the SPVM, Montreal Police, taking a very clear political act. But I don't know this, but I don't actually think the first phase is as much of that. Like we want to get Yves as it is just kind of a connection to Zionist lobbying and just kind of like, oh, we'll just move this along and that. But I don't know.
But it's like, it's you, Eve. It's like, who thought that they could make you stay quiet? So they had to know whatever they did to you would get amplified, whether you did it or somebody else did it. It was just like, there was no way they were just going to be able to like, oh, this will just shut the law firm up. It was going to create a problem for them. And just from reporting what's happening to Palestinian solidarity activists here in mostly Toronto, but Ontario, and the way that there is the hate crimes working group within the Attorney General's office that coordinates with the hate crimes police forces and things like Project Resolute. And they're actually coordinating with each other to torment activists, even just through process, right? With the same bullshit, not the same charges, because this is just next level, I think, the ridiculousness of both sets of charges, but just the idea of laying charges with no real concern on whether there'll be a conviction or not, because, your name gets smeared and, you end up with bail conditions that make your life miserable. Their goal is often to then nail you on breach, right? Like, go ahead, agree to not write about this, but I know you're going to. I know you're going to slip up. You're going to say something in an interview that's going to get you, and we will get you on breach, and then we'll really be able to lock you down. These are tactics that have been deployed on Palestinian solidarity activists in Canada, in Ontario, for like a year now. So the methodology doesn't surprise me at all, but I think there is always a broader political, because they had to have known it would have brought up the political, right? That it wasn't just going to be another charge on the sheet that day, that this guy was going to make noise about it, right? And we know so because that's why we're trying to ask him for these bail conditions. And one of the advice we give our audience is to do what you did, is to hold on as long as possible to get some of these ridiculous bail conditions in front of justice of the peace or a judge or somebody, at least get it on record. And often some of them are seen as what they are, and they don't become a problem. But 5 days, that's quite a bit to stay in there. We very much appreciate you doing that. I can understand from a personal level and a values-based level why you, Eve, wouldn't want to sign on to those conditions. But you also realize by not signing those and making this stand that was for the entire movement, particularly in Canada, right, and sending a message not just to authorities, that shit wouldn't be taken lightly, but to all the other activists out there, right? And if you can hold on, if you can challenge these bail conditions, it's worth it in the end because they're very suppressive. We've had folks in Ottawa, at least 5 of them, it sounds like, had numerous charges and awful bail conditions that essentially just took them right out of the movement. Right? They can't contact one another. They can't attend Palestinian protests is a common condition put on folks. So we're very much appreciative it didn't take you out of the fight and you were able to fight those conditions, but it kind of set a precedent for folks to, and an example to follow. Did you feel that pressure as well? Like, you have a family, you want to get home to them, right? 5 days is a long time to sit and stew and be away from your littles and your loved ones, but there's bigger game at play, isn't there here?
Yeah, there's definitely been a game. I obviously understood the conditions fight as a broader fight. I have to say, and I've know many of the examples you're talking about Ottawa. I heard stories about Toronto and stuff like that. I didn't understand this conditions question of like the no talking about it as becoming basically the standard that the Crown here was pursuing. I've only learned about that as part of dealing with this, and I had like lawyer send a judgment that basically made it really clear this was unconstitutional.
A previous judgment.
So we used that. So because going public, then people heard about this, and then were able to assist my lawyer in responding to this condition. So I was very obviously happy that kind of. I've been able to, this condition is now put under much more public attention, and it's going to be harder for the Crown to pursue it. I have to say, my initial reaction when I got the phone call from the police officer, and the first thing is my initial reaction was to like argue, which is probably not, legally speaking, not the right thing to do. It's probably your best thing is just listen to them.
Shut the fuck up, right? That's the advice. Shut the fuck up.
My personal political inclination was to be outraged at like what are you like, are you kidding me? You're gonna like this like genocidal like maniac is coming to like stop me from being able to respond to her open racism, and Delia Kurtz is like promoting these neo-Nazis calling for mass deportation, right? She's like totally she's not in this sort of like I don't know, the hard Zionist mainstream. She's off into like a different territory of kind of far right kind of politics. But anyway, so that was. But my actual initial concern, condition wise, was a condition of keeping the peace. That they were going to bring that condition, and my reasoning for that, of course, is because I go to lots of press conferences where sometimes you have to get in.
That's why I'm laughing. You could not keep the peace.
Yeah, you have to get in ways that the police, if the police know I have that condition, that they can be like, Yves.
That's such a broad interpretation too of disrupting the peace, right? Like that could be anything. That could be a dog squeak toy.
Exactly. So I'd say, my lawyer was kind of like, well, that's a standard condition. You don't want to get into a fight on that. That's pretty standard. His initial reaction was kind of like, don't fight that too much. Now, of course, when he heard the condition of the silence, then he immediately counseled me. I was already clearly not going to do that, but he immediately counseled not to do that. But so that was actually my initial concern. But yeah, I mean, clearly there's this need for public campaigning, public pressure, obviously a legal side to it as well, of just being, challenging the whole kind of architecture of police and Crown using their leverage in moments of vulnerability with people, and imposing different conditions that are obviously have massive political implications. So yeah, it's good that this may undermine that. I hope obviously this undermines that, and also there's obviously the more specific side to the kind of Zionist lawfare element to this whole equation that needs to be worked on as well.
I'm writing that down. Zionist lawfare. That's a new term for me. I know exactly what it means, but we've seen a lot of that, right? Where charges that would never have been levied, and a lot of disrupting charges and mischief charges for simply standing in the street, like things that will never end up in, for sure, jail time, let alone a conviction. And you mentioned, maybe a couple weeks, but we've got plenty of examples where these conditions plague people for a year or more. And many are getting picked up on breach because of the way they can be interpreted. So, yeah, movement lawyers are working on it, but it's hard to keep in front of them because the way the Crown and the police are operating is like ever changing, ever escalating, it seems like. I think to take a journalist, I'm going to say off the streets, but they politely called you in, which is a tactic that they use, right? Is they'll kind of haunt you with phone calls first to try to get you to come in, but so that you don't get picked up where you don't want to get picked up, in front of your family, maybe in front of your employer. But 5 days you spent in there. I see people commenting when you were released. I can't remember whether it was maybe Alex Terrell that mentioned it, but that you had pages and pages of handwritten articles. What were you writing about while you were in there? Where was your mind at?
Well, I got really lucky. On the Thursday night when we got brought to the prison, to Bordeaux prison, there happened to be one of those really small pencils sitting on a table with a couple of these forms that you're supposed to fill in if you want to have some request for the prison authorities. And at the moment I didn't realize how lucky I'd gotten in getting the pencil, but I then had a pencil, which I should say one of the other prisoners who kind of like ran the area I was in, ran in quotations, tried to get it from me at one point. I pushed back, and a guard tried to get it from me at one point. I pushed back on that as well. And basically, so I then had a pencil, which it was difficult to get paper. I had to rip up this big brown bag that they gave us to keep our stuff in. But I was able to write. And so I wrote about some of the stuff, the experience. I haven't published most of it. I haven't published yet because I've been so busy. But I wrote about, things like just about a general letter about Trump, Canada, foreign policy kind of thing. A couple articles about elements. Like there's a history here. I just submitted one of them.
Really?
The CSIS has been targeting Palestine solidarity for decades, right? There's books I talk about in my Canada and Israel book, where like the Communication Security Establishment, the Canada's version of NSA, had like PLO and Arafat as part of their names. This is going back to like the 70s, where there were signals intelligence, and so they've been compiling information on Palestine related and passing that to Mossad. There's a whole history of Mossad using Canadian passports in their assassinations in the early 70s, and in the most infamously in Jordan against Mashal, the head of Hamas's political bureau. At that point, they poisoned him, and then the Israeli agents got caught, and they had to give the antidote, and that they were using Canadian passports, and it became a bit of a diplomatic scandal. So I'm kind of fitting the recent targeting of myself specifically, but then over the past 16 months into a longer history of the Canadian security intelligence agencies targeting of Palestine activism. And obviously that's one of Canada's contributions to Zionism or Palestinian dispossession, that element of the relationship. So stuff like that, and some stuff about just kind of like the framing, like my initial tweets and messaging about the framing of the victory for free speech and stuff like that. Yeah, I think I ended up writing seven articles or something like that. It was also like I didn't know if I would be able to get them out. I wasn't actually sure. I had told the prison guard when I was that these were like part of my defense, and he was actually quite skeptical. So I was able to keep the articles. He put it in a envelope. So I thought it was a chance that I would just lose all of my work. But it was also, I think, it was healthy also to just sort of to do something, and that's one of the things to see in jail, how much. There's a lot of distress. Like, it's kind of remarkable how much distress people were under, and honestly, the kind of reaction to the situation, I don't think was very healthy. Like a lot of people would just like stay in bed all day. And I tried to follow, very clear, wake up in the morning, go to bed at 10 o'clock, whatever, right? And to sort of, obviously the writing helped in kind of stabilizing things for me and making the time kind of more pleasant and less difficult. But yeah, so it was a mix of that, and then obviously put a lot of political things that I want to write about and have come out.
We saw like some incredible showing of solidarity for your case. I don't know. I imagine you've seen it now. The video from Roger Waters. You even mentioned it in your thank you letter on your website. A folk song written about you or about your case, and thousands of letters, the tweets, the uproar. Were you feeling any of that on the inside? How did you feel support in there? Or were you just hoping it was all happening?
I was hoping it was happening, and probably my one of my kind of the lowest moment in the jail was basically that feeling like there was a whole bunch of things that I should have done before coming in to facilitate more kind of like campaigning, and that there was like sort of like some communication things with regards to my phone. I should have given it to somebody, like give it to my dad. I should have given it to Alex Terrell. A few communication things things I got going to help kind of like engender more kind of uproar.
They did a good job without it, didn't they?
People did a great job without it. I saw it obviously on Friday at the court. I'm on video from the prison. You could see people in the courtroom, so I knew that right there, and that obviously that was it lifted my spirits. I didn't see it on the Monday morning. I was told that like 100 plus people showed up on the Monday morning, but it was very concrete in its. Well, I can't prove this, but very likely it helped for two different ways in the how the judge dealt with it, because they didn't send me on the Monday, despite myself going to the prison guards at 7:30 in the morning and saying, like, why haven't I been sent to the courthouse, which is downtown? The prison's about 45 minutes away. Why haven't I been sent downtown when my court's happening today? And they said, no, it's tomorrow. And so apparently there was some sort of error in the date sent. I don't know if this error was, it actually was an error, how the whole process played out. I'm told it really was on the side of the court clerk. They wrote the wrong day. If that happened in my case, it probably happens fairly often then.
It does to Palestinian solidarity activists.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if you have other examples of that, yeah.
We do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what the turnout did is it basically the judge called I don't know if it was actually the judge or their assistant, but the judge pressed to call the prison. And so suddenly at 11 o'clock, so after 7:30 morning, just after that, I'm told like, no, it's tomorrow. And I'm kind of confused. And I'm like, initially you're kind of like, oh, are they going to try to keep me in here forever? And like, and then after a few minutes of thinking of that, and I just go, okay, well, I got 24 more hours, just go back to my routine and sit down, start writing. And then suddenly at 11 o'clock, all of a sudden it's like emergency. The prison guards come in. Engler, get all your stuff. Like, get your underwear on. I got to go. And so basically the judge had either directly or with their assistant said, what's going on here? He has to be in court today. And I'm pretty confident that if there's no one in the room, the judge does not take the time to press that to get down. And so I think that was a very, like, that solidarity was very concrete in helping get out, at least helping get out 24 hours earlier. But then the bigger thing, I think, was that the presence led to the judge taking the time to think about what was actually being asked with this condition, right? That this wasn't just like, oh, okay, this is just a pro forma condition. Yeah, he's accused of harassing somebody. And so, yeah, we just don't want him to talk, and because that could be viewed as harassment, and just move it along. And so then I think that the presence in the room, and the judge was very clear about it. And then all the prison guards, I got mentioned repeatedly by different prison guards that there's all these people waiting for you outside. There's all the people in the room, and people talked about the cheering. And somebody, a prison guard, who was like across the way, said, you're the person who all that cheering was from. I heard it in my courtroom, like, 1 over or 2 over or whatever, right? So I didn't hear the initial because they put you back into this like detention area and stuff like that. So clearly the whole, a big chunk of the structure of the courthouse kind of, became aware of all this. And so I think that they treated me better. The guards, who often can treat you very unkindly, they treated me better in response to that, in part. Um, so yeah, the solidarity was, I think, had a clear judicial benefit, and obviously then it's the bigger picture as well, in that this is about it's about sending the message to the authorities that if you pursue this type of thing elsewhere in other instances, we're going to try to make a big kerfuffle about it and make your life difficult in trying to do that. So the all the campaigning and stuff is not just narrowly about this case, but about possible other cases, and cases that have already happened, for that matter, and trying to push back against some of this legal and policing abuse.
We saw your partner and your father speak to the media. This wasn't the first time for your father. He explained like he was a journalist as well when he introduced himself there. But that's a lot of pressure that goes on them quite quickly, maybe unexpectedly. Did they feel the support as well?
Yeah, I think they did. The issue with my partner and my youngest, my almost 3-year-old too, they actually were flying back from Uganda on Friday morning. So I hadn't actually there for 2 months. So I hadn't seen my daughter in 2 months. My son came back 5 weeks ago because he had school and came back and stuff. So it was an added dimension of. There was a personal element to me not being able to see them immediately after a long period, and also there was this sort of added burden on. 2-year-old doesn't really process that, but of course Bianca, the burden on her. And so there was this added burden. My dad was kind of like involved. He from right away, and he's retired and there's a greater flexibility of time, and he was involved in the coordination with my lawyer and Alex Turrell and others who were organizing pushback. But yeah, it was a burden on them. There's no doubt about that. It's stressful too. I wasn't traumatized by being in jail in any way. There were moments that were not pleasant. Obviously, lots of boredom, but honestly, I would say I had as many fun moments as I did like bad moments, right? But I did think to myself, obviously repeatedly, one of the kind of bad parts is like, how are others processing me being in here, right? Like that's hard on Bianca to be like, doesn't really know. You don't know the condition. I wasn't able to talk to her. I wasn't able to talk to my lawyer the whole time. It was crazy on that front. Total violation of rights. I think that people who know me knew that it was unlikely to be too hard for me.
And we saw the video of you going in. You seemed pretty stoic and resolved. Like, did you not have a moment though where you just like, did you lose it for a minute? Like, big let out massive F-bombs. Did you think it was a prank at any point?
Well, I on the Friday when I was told I was going back until Monday, which was now the second video hearing I'd had. So again, the cops could have just given conditions right away. Could have been 15 minutes out the door. Then I have a video hearing on the Thursday at about 4 or 5 hours later. The Crown says no, we object to his liberation. So they could have said, okay, yeah, you can go there. Then I have another video hearing on the Friday. At this point, I think it's going to be my bail hearing, right? Though they wouldn't let me talk to my lawyer, so I wasn't able to prepare the defense. So at that point, after that, and now they're just going to push it off to Monday, and nothing has actually happened. So at that point, I was like, oh God, this is going to be 72 hours more, and who knows if they're just going to try to figure something out to push it off. And in fact, we now sort of know that, it almost did get pushed off another day because of either, bureaucratic error or whatever. so there was a moment there where I was like, I was wondering, like, is this worth it? And also, I should also point out that I didn't know I was going to win on the condition, right? So it's like, I was willing to, like, and I asked my lawyer this. I was like, if you're telling me I have to be in it for a week to win on the condition, then I'm fine with the week. But if you're telling me I'm staying here for another 3 days,
For nothing.
yeah, for 10% chance on the condition, then I have to think that through about, in terms of, right. So there are, questions like that where I got kind of, like, sort of down. And yeah, so I had some moments after the video hearing on the Friday where I was just like, questioning my decisions and questioning, did I, and I also thought to myself, like, was I maybe, was there sort of like a trap that I kind of fell into, that these pro-Israel types sort of were trying to get me to act in certain ways in response to this kind of legal thing? You ask yourself these questions of was it the right, because I should tell you right away, I was told not to go public. Right, my lawyer.
Had he not known you very long, or what?
When I wrote the article in response to the initial charge of Dalia, he was basically like, "Don't do it. Don't go public." And my inclination was like this is outrageous. I'm up for the fight. If this, I think I'm right in the narrow, okay, on the legal condition question, but that's a small part of the right question. And I think on the broad question of Israel's genocide, I think that we are so clearly right that it's, like, the fight is necessary and essential. But so, yeah, so you doubt yourself a little bit. That was, difficult. And also, the Friday morning, I was like disappointed I didn't get to see them coming back. They were coming back early in the morning from Uganda, and like disappointed that. And Bianca's good friend died three months ago in a really terrible situation, and there was a memorial on Saturday. So it was a bit difficult to not go to that, and yeah, so there were some things like that. But anyways, it was for the most part, it was not, it wasn't traumatic for me.
I mean, it still enrages us. It's so glad to hear that it didn't. But it was enraging for folks who had seen arrest after arrest. It wasn't surprising to see, hear people getting hauled away. But this just hit a little bit differently. And I don't think we often, like, single out cases of police suppression like the way that we did. But coming at a journalist just seemed like a ratchet up. We're very much grateful that it ended up pretty good for you. But can you tell us a little bit more about being denied your lawyer? Because one of the pieces of advice that we give folks on the show, we've had movement lawyers on as well, on top of shut the fuck up being the number one piece of advice, but silence is like deadly to activists. And Yves, being a journalist activist, is and I'm speaking to the audience here a little bit, like, you could hear how he needed to keep that pencil and had to write. Like, these conditions wouldn't just be, tying my hands on talking about my case. Asking activists to stop pursuing Zionists and trying to end the genocide, that's just not an option. Right? It's not an option. We've talked to people who've been arrested and, they've not gone through what Eva's gone through, I think, in terms of like 5 days waiting for bail, but just being in these predicaments and it being very stressful, but also trying to remember what Palestinian prisoners go through as a means to, like, if they can do that, I can do this, right? If there's thousands of them detained without charge in Israeli Zionist prisons, we just saw 600 hostages released just the other day. So I think that helps you put it into perspective. But I kind of deterred from my question there. You weren't given a lawyer, even, and correct me if I'm wrong, even though a judge at some point admonished that process and said you were due a lawyer and to remedy that. What was happening there? Because, yeah, like, the other piece of advice we give people is ask for a lawyer right away. Don't say anything to police. Make it clear you want legal representation and don't sign those bail conditions until you hear from someone. But that wasn't easy for you.
No, it wasn't easy. First of all, there's no doubt. I thought about Palestinian prisoners a lot. The situation of, difficulty is, I mean, it's just in the dungeons, the lack of any rights for Palestinian prisoners is like the scope at which this is, so much, and the whole the concept of steadfastness. I try to, in the moments when I did, find difficulty, I basically kind of admonish myself for being like, come on, are you kidding me? Like, people who have been 20 years in these Israeli dungeons, and there's like, which is, I think, for me at least, that was a very good way to sort of bring myself back to reality in a, in sort of context of difficulty. And I think that is important at a big picture level of I've always kind of argued it in the I've said this around like Haiti stuff, and like so much of Haitian affairs, the difficulty that Haitians can be resolved in Ottawa or Montreal or New York or Washington D.C. By campaigning, and it's like if the amount of work that we need to do, and the amount of, I guess, in the call it pain that we would need to suffer to lessen that pain and suffering in Haiti, and it holds slightly different dynamics, but holds to a large extent with Palestinians. The amount of pain we would suffer to change the political dynamics, to lessen the pain there, is not that much, right? Like, that pain is so much less, and so obviously should be. I mean, everyone's in different personal situations and whatever, but we should push that to the extent we can. Now, with regards to the guards, or the guards and the phone and the lawyer, it was pretty stunning. Nothing, no phone, no talking to my lawyer the whole time.
What do you mean the whole time? Like, until you were brought to the court?
Until the court, yeah. So
how did you even know you secured? Because you secured a lawyer before you went in.
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
lawyer was all he didn't. He had something on the Thursday morning, so he couldn't accompany us down to the detention center. But he was aware that was all happening, and it was. And after the video court on the Thursday, something around 3 o'clock, I asked the police officer for a lawyer, to talk to the lawyer, and they said, you'll be able to talk to a lawyer when you get to the prison. And it didn't get to the prison until about 9 p.m. And I asked nothing, no. And then on the Friday morning, they took me down to a video hearing at the prison. And my lawyer had to stop, even though, there was 20, 30 people in the room. The room was like full. They had to stop the discussion because I hadn't had a chance to talk to my lawyer, and to then go over to a different room to talk to my lawyer. But that it impacted the whole kind of how the process played out. It disadvantaged me effectively, beyond the fact that if you discuss and you can plan in advance and think about and all that stuff, but even in the narrow of actually how the process was playing itself out, it disadvantaged me. And then my lawyer on the Friday said, we haven't been to talk to him. We need to prepare a defense, and asked the judge to mandate the prison to enable us to discuss over the weekend. And they just ignored it.
What?
But I don't know if it was even sent to. I don't know if it was sent to the prison. But in this case, again, like, I don't think this was actually. This wasn't politically targeted. It wasn't targeted at me in that sense. It was politically targeted in a broad sense, in that they do that with everyone. All the prisoners were like, it's just the bare minimum. Like, apparently in our cell, well, there were phones. They were like private. They were whatever, bell phones, the private phones, I guess, and they had been broken. Apparently they've been broken recently. I don't know. There are two of them. So they're what we're being told to me. I don't know if it's true or not. That a few weeks ago, if someone in my situation would have had access to these phones, and I guess at some point been able to call their lawyer. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if they were trying to fix the phones or not. Or on the Monday, once the error of me being in court got onto the radar, they brought a phone for me to try my lawyer. I wasn't able to get through to him.
Of
So
course.
obviously they have the technology to offer phone calls to.
Yeah, we have a thing called cell phones. They
Yeah,
exist. They can
yeah.
move from room to
They had those
room.
old school, like, you put them on the thing, but you can move 100 feet away or whatever from the phone. Anyway,
Oh, the
or a
cordless.
cordless, yeah. So I hadn't seen one of those in a while, but they obviously could if they cared, but that was just abundantly clear in all of the treatment, is that the guards are like, there is a clear dehumanization. I think the guards themselves get dehumanized in the process, but it's mostly, of course, against the prisoners. That it's just like they're trying to do the bare minimum of stuff. So they'll bring the food. But it's like they don't want to fulfill any request. Like there's a whole form, fill out a form about you talking to a lawyer. I did that on the Sunday when I was finally told about it. I've been asking verbally for the lawyer from right when I got there, and then they finally told me on the Sunday at noon that you got to fill out a form. And I'm like, what? Why do you tell me this now? So I filled the form out right away, put it in, and then at 5 o'clock when they locked down, because then they're locking down at 5, apparently because there wasn't enough guards. That's what they're saying. I don't know why, but that's what they're saying. At 5 o'clock, and I'm like, but I haven't talked to my lawyer yet. And the guy's like, the guy then, the guard just tells me he doesn't even move my form along. The form's just sitting on the desk. They basically just like laugh at me about the talking to my lawyer. And that's the kind of like attitude across the board, is they don't want to fulfill any requests. They don't want to, like, it's just the minimum. Some of it, to be fair to the guards, some of it is like there's a kind of like understandable element. There's a whole bunch of elements. First of all, if you humanize the person you need to sort of dehumanize, because the structure, of course, is structured that way. It's awkward for the individual if you want to, like, treat them like they're a human being and equal or whatever, but then everything in the structure is telling you can't do that. That's, of course, going to make it harder on yourself to just do your job, because then you feel bad about things and stuff like that. Some of it also on the other side, one of the guys who was in there with me, this guy, he shit himself repeatedly. The older guy, like about 70, he shit himself just like all over his bed in kind of like his area. And then later on, he was wearing a diaper when I first saw him. And then later on, he has his pants on with his diaper on top of his pants. So he didn't understand that you have to have the diaper on. This guy's in jail. Like, I have no idea what they accused him of, but like, that guy should, like he doesn't understand. Like, he can't physically control his body, and he clearly doesn't, like, understand. And this guy would go to the guards, kind of like every 15 minutes to ask something. So we would just have eaten like an hour earlier, and he'd be going to the guards asking about food. And so you can even, like, kind of understand from a guard's perspective that, like, it's like you don't know what's kind of like a reasonable request and what's just kind of like, because there's tons of mental illness. There's tons of, you know, as I said in a few places, like, they ask you about suicide. A detention center asks you about suicide, and then right away when you get to prison, they ask about suicide. And it's because they're bringing people to a large extent who have all kinds of like in distress, mental illness, and they're putting them in a situation that's even more stressful and even more, right? So they're just exacerbating that. And then, I mean, they're asking about the suicide in part to kind of cover their own ass. It's like kind of like, I think, from the, right? Not to, we tried to ensure that didn't happen or whatever kind of thing. But it is also, real. I think it does. I'm sure there is a massive increase in attempts or actual, suicides. So you kind of look at all these from these different directions, and it's a totally dehumanizing. I don't think that not being able to talk to my lawyer was about me. I think it was about that all of us, none of us were able to get through, and it's obviously outrageous that the prison does that, or has that happen. And then the guards themselves at the kind of lower level in that, it's like, it's wrong that they don't realize that this is wrong, and that they, I don't know, maybe push a bit more, but they're kind of caught in this like awkward kind of position. So it's definitely not I don't think there's like an easy solution. Some of the people I talked to but a number of people were there for beating or abusing their partners, right? And talking to this one guy who was just totally, like, I would say, on the surface it seemed just out of proportion, kind of distressed with his situation. He was this like 33-year-old guy, like, I don't know, kind of like pretty good shape. He looked like he had some physical. He had hurt his hand, and I think he'd been in a fight with his partner. Don't know all the details and what exactly happened, but his level of kind of distress, and then breaking down like what his distress was over, was quite fascinating in terms of like how you would deal with it. Because like clearly he needed counseling. But part of his issue was that his apartment, he had a good price apartment by a metro that he got, and that his partner got in the dispute. I obviously don't know all the details of the dispute. So clearly this guy needs counseling. I think, he needs to be kept away from his partner. So those conditions that were there that he had breached, I think that, right, those make sense but part of the issue was housing. He was stressed. This guy, he'd been homeless when he was in his youth, and so he'd gotten a good deal of a place, and knowing that it was unlikely he would be able to get another, similar type situation. So, like, clear, like, social housing, even though ostensibly social housing had nothing to do with this issue, social housing was part of the issue, right? Because that's a big part of what his stress was about. Presumably, also part of his, like, his ongoing conflict with his former partner. So, when you look at it, how to intervene to not arrive at a situation where people are being put in that place, there's like a bunch of different interventions that are actually necessary. It's not a simple, there's no sort of simple solution. But the first phase, of course, is to desire to not have people incarcerated, and to some extent, our society has that, but not enough. And then go about, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, like they're not directly related, but we know that, so-called crime is directly correlated to levels of poverty and distress, social distress. So it is all interconnected, and just being able to go inside and see this firsthand allows you to speak about it on a different level now. These charges have brought a different level of notoriety. I mean, it's not like you were an unknown before this. Many books written, endless videos now in the last year and a half of you attempting to hold not just liberals, but all elected officials that aren't doing enough accountable. I love that you posted a video almost the next day at a Jagmeet Singh conference, holding it to him, asking him about the fighter jet contract. And then I load up yesterday, or just this morning, I see Lanceman in front of your lens, and I can't believe you just didn't even take a week off or anything.
I mean, I do those things because I believe in doing them. I think they're a useful form of political intervention. But I have to say really clearly, I had an added motivation. I left a whole bunch of other things aside that I do really want to get to, and the energy to do that, because I also wanted to send a message that like, if you thought this was going to like stop me, or this was going to intimidate me, or all that kind of stuff, so there was this added motivation. I want to do these to not just show the authorities, but actually just show all the people who've kind of paid attention to the issue and rallied in support, that like, yeah, that and because I think there's an act of defiance in there that I wanted to communicate more broadly.
I felt it. Like the relief. Like, I still think you deserved a few days off, by the way, but I understand completely what you said there. And because I felt that, just being like, you hadn't missed a step. You had missed 5 days, but you hadn't, like, there was that defiance was still heard in your voice, and you were still, pressing folks in an unapologetic way, right? Like, you're known as an agitator, and we know that that's in part why you were targeted, right? Many journalists have, well, maybe not many, have, used the fascist word label. A lot of people have identified pro-genocide supporters, Zionists. Most of them are open about their support for it. You know, they may not use the genocide word, but it's not like a stretch with all of the international rulings that have called it a genocide. I want to read Penn's statement out loud, or at least a couple sentences from their statement, because when we go back to the beginning of the conversation and we're talking about the kinds of charges Eve was facing and just how ridiculous they are, I think Penn just kind of summed it up pretty good here. They say they take the position that it's not a crime to take a pro-Palestinian stance in public. It is not a crime to object to those who support Israel's actions or to describe them as fascists. It's not a crime to criticize or condemn the state of Israel. It's not a crime to write that Israel's actions in Gaza are genocide. To object in print to others who support Israel's actions is not a threat to any individual or to the police. It is not harassment to object to actions taken by the Montreal Police or to write about them. It's not a crime to ask other citizens of Canada to object to actions taken by the Montreal Police. Every citizen of Canada is entitled to write their opinions and to speak out in public. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right, whether one agrees with the content of such statements or whether one disagrees with the content. So we all know that that's true. And when you read it so plain and clear like that, there's very few people, I think, across Canada, even who do not like what you do, okay? Because, you've made enemies by design. But surely that no one would agree that what you did was worth any charges. And if the goal was to silence you, but they achieved the opposite, do you think they're regretting their actions at this point?
I would think so, but we know one part that's public, one part that's not. They have pursued sort of similar things now against Senator Wu and someone else that I can't name the specifics of at this point, meaning that Kurtz and Oberman are now going after the Canadian senator for having posted in solidarity with my imprisonment. So they seem to believe they're going on the offensive further. So they don't seem to think that this was an error. I think it very clearly,
it's a template for them.
Yeah, and so like there's all kinds of elements in terms of kind of pursuing. Like I think that Dahlia, the more that we can make Dahlia Kurtz the face of pro-Israel campaigning in Canada, I think the better from the standpoint of Palestine world, because I think it's her positions are not ones that the vast majority of people are going to be sympathetic to. I also think that the whole Neil Oberman, the fact that it's a conservative candidate, and I was Samira in the interview I did with her, she actually showed a clip of Polyev calling Neil Oberman Doberman, like a dog, the vicious dog, and boasting that he needed to be in the House of Commons because of all the injunctions that he's taken out against Palestine. He's the one who took the injunction at the McGill encampment and others. And so the idea that the leader of the Conservative Party is saying that we need this like aggressive cancel culture, anti-free speech activist lawyer to be an MP. Now, yesterday when we went to the Landsman, myself and Alex Terrell, the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, Alex asked one of the people at the table, this was a Neil Oberman event, and he asked one of the people with a Neil Oberman shirt on, basically that variation of that question of, what do you think people who criticize Israel should be thrown in jail? And the woman was like, of course not. This was somebody who was almost certainly very staunchly pro-Israel and a Neil Oberman supporter, and she just reacted, of course not. And yet Neil Oberman has been kind of like working that. So yes, I think that like there is this broad, when you get into the free speech kind of realm, you get a lot of people who don't necessarily support my stuff on Palestine, and may even be support Israel for that matter. But they do believe in the principle of freedom of expression, and I think there are some fissures within like the conservative movement and Polyev, like they do frame themselves as a sort of like they do this whole rhetoric of like the anti-woke, pro-free speech, and the whole cancel culture kind of language and stuff like that.
And Trudeau blocking media so that he's censoring the news on Canadian social media feeds.
So there's some divisions there that I think are worth certainly the Palestine solidarity world kind of like trying to exploit and trying to bring out and stuff like that. Obviously, like the more that the pro-Israel movement is viewed as like authoritarian, there's a positive in that. Now, of course, it's been a very like this isn't new. This isn't just in the last 16 months. I've seen this for 25 years now. Like that's my personal coming to political consciousness is not coming on Palestine. Like it comes from like anti-corporate globalization and sort of general kind of like left stuff, and then being thrust into the Palestine kind of movement at Concordia, 25 years ago, and seeing the authoritarian nature of the Zionist kind of movement. That's all picked up. It's massively over the past 16 months. So it's not something new, but it's gotten a lot worse. So it's one thing to say that the more they're viewed as authoritarian, that may lead to some greater sympathy for Palestine. But that's not exactly correct, because it's been going on for quite a while, and how that exactly plays out. But I think that in terms of some of this stuff, the freedom of expression, there is important to build broader kind of freedom of expression, Palestine kind of consciousness campaigning. The Penn letter, I think, does sort of contribute to that. And obviously all the other forms of support for my situation obviously also contribute to that.
I wonder, will you change anything about the way you operate?
Well, I obviously am not going to have any direct communication to Dahlia Kurtz, and also the Montreal Police inspector that I...
Will you chirp at other people? Will it stop you from tagging folks when you've got... or calling people fascists in that way?
Oh, no, not at all. No, not at all. No, just the narrow in the... there's some little bits on X that I haven't... There were some people who were posting, they had posted Dahlia Kurtz's, they've tagged her, and then I wasn't really sure if I then respond to them, like how... Yeah, I don't know how exactly that would play out, right? So I initially...
Well, if you reply, her tag will be there. You'd have to like take it off.
Yeah,
like who's interpreting this?
Yes. So I had some like questions that I'm going to tread carefully. I don't like Dahlia Kurtz in that sense. It's like I don't follow her on X. It's like totally inconsequential. I mean, in principle, I feel I should have the right to respond to her, of course, but it's fairly inconsequential in the kind of bigger thing. So I'm going to try to avoid that. But aside from that, my plan is, and like I said, my initial concern was that condition of keeping the peace, because that has this very broad, implication or potential implication. But no, yeah, I don't plan to change. And I should say, I'm really clear. It further it angers me or embitters me towards Zionist campaigning and the Zionist structure of first of all, obviously supporting all of Israel's crimes, but also of using and abusing and the policing judicial system to again serve killing more babies in Gaza.
Yeah, and in support of a foreign state's policy. It is shocking to see the police deployed in such an extent to such a specific purpose, and I don't think. And I agree with you that not everything that happened to you was politically motivated, but when it's happening, it sure feels that way, right? Look what they're doing to him. And, it's just like, it just added fuel to everybody's fire, though. So in the same way you talk about, exposing the authoritarianism, taking that mask off, right? Whether it's the police, the Crown, law firms, conservative candidates, and all of that, they only do it because we've gotten to a certain point where they're forced to use these ridiculous tactics that aren't even working. They're not working. Yes, they took you away from your family for 5 days. It could cost you some resources, distress for sure, but they made you louder. They increased your audience. They had people reaffirming support for you, even though they had to couch it in like, I may not agree with everything Yves does, right? But I stand with him right now. So people who thought maybe they would never would stand alongside of you did. So, and this happens with other arrestees as well, who fight or find community in the process, have jail support, have legal support, and can take this stand. They end up stronger, more connected, more informative. I don't know if you were before, but now you're talking abolition a little bit. You said you didn't remember what the original question was, but it was just that whether you thought they regretted what they did. And so, yeah, like they might attempt this again and again, but every time they do, and every time they tighten that fist, it just seems to make us stronger and more determined as individuals and as a movement. Because, you're mad about what happened to you. Many other people are mad about what happened to you. Many of us who do that kind of snarkiness on the internet or can be affront to some people and their identities and whatnot. It had them thinking about, what does this mean for me? Like, are we all just targets? But I don't think it's going to slow anybody down in the same way it hasn't really slowed any of the movement down, despite all of these arrests and threats and, the narratives that float out there that we're all supporters of terrorism. None of this garbage has really, it's done the complete opposite. So I guess that's a message to folks who feel distress seeing this, like feel like we're deep in fascism and this police state is just ever widening. It is a sign that they are afraid and they are having to deploy tactics they normally would have reserved, for emergencies. So,
well, I think the one part of all this is a positive in the sense that it's a response to the upsurge. There's never been in the history of Canadian foreign policy, there's never been an instance of more activism over Canada's complicity in international crime than there has been over the past 16 months. So part of the attacks against Palestine solidarity is because there's been so much of it. So that's a positive. On the note of how there's a discomfort in some of how you respond to some of this suppression and state authority and stuff like that, because I do think obviously it's healthy. We need to know, for instance, the history. They were people killed against conscription during World War I. They killed Ginger Goodwin out Vancouver Island. World War One. There was tons and tons of people thrown in jail. World War II, also the mayor of Montreal, the head of the Seamen's Union, thrown in jail. Korean War. There was the head of the Canadian Peace Congress. His house was firebombed, and Lester Pearson was calling on people to destroy the Peace Congress, and then Foreign Minister Lester Pearson. And so there is a long history of repression against international focused kind of activism and other, for that matter, of course, activism as well, anti-war. And so we should know that history, and we should obviously know about all these outrageous cases across the country of different activists that have been their houses raided over the past year or year and a half. So all that's really important. But there's also a line between that and, I would say, unhealthy paranoia, and they are all powerful and we are all weak, and therefore, and what leads to inactivity, right? And it can lead to inactivity. I've seen many experiences over many years about people who their conception of the extent of the state surveillance slash repression, I think, goes beyond the
reality
and gets into and then it becomes I think in some ways it can become a justification for not acting. That there's an element sometimes in that, but it just effectively takes on well, I'm not going to act because I'm too scared or because it's too overwhelming and stuff like that.
Or futile, right? If you believe the state is all that powerful, what are you to accomplish there?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that I'm also happy in all this is to get a win, and it's ultimately it's a really minimal win, right? It's like just like no condition about speaking. So it's really, in some sense, it's like a ridiculously small win. But to get that win, like I hope breaks down some of that, that the futile or some of that, and gives a little bit of like boost to the movement, to Palestine, to free, what exactly that movement is, but mostly Palestine.
It is, like, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, just securing your basic rights, right? Like making sure your bail conditions weren't unconstitutional shouldn't be a victory, but it really felt like one, right? It really did, especially to folks who have been watching your work so closely and understand its relation to the Canadian state. So it was just like, if they could silence you on this little thing, it would have set a horrible precedent, and it felt a lot bigger. Even my partner here, who doesn't follow a whole lot, when I said Yves is out, he knew that was a very good thing, and it brought him a level of relief. Like, it was, I know you didn't feel that, and this isn't to center like how all we felt, but it was a mix of emotions, I think, for a lot of folks, that just, especially people who hadn't been exposed to the pervasiveness. I know you want to like try to not minimize it, but cautious around how we talk about that. But I think people are shocked at the behavior of police. It's something you read about. We talk about what a police state looks like, or fascism, but to see it happen like that, and that's why I asked you at one point, did you not think it was a prank at some point, that like your tweets to Dahlia were leading to an arrest? Like a real one, not just like, I'm calling you, scare you, like a cease and desist letter. It was like, no, they were ready to cuff you because you called someone a fascist on the internet. It just seems surreal, honestly. But it was very, very real. I very much appreciate you holding fast. I've said that a few times. I said it on Twitter because, like, I was holding my breath a little bit because it meant a lot for you not to give up on those conditions. But at the same time, you don't want to put pressures on an individual. When I read you had a 2-year-old, having littles myself, I go, that's tough. You do just want to be in and out in there in 15 minutes. Not because you have shit to do, but because there's all of the awful things you describe while you were in there, amongst other things. So I know it wasn't easy, but we very much appreciate you fighting those conditions so that we could hear all about your case, but also for selfish reasons, like for our movement and for us as individuals to kind of strengthen our resolve and our understanding of what's on the line here. So thank you for doing that and for spending your precious time in our studio today. You must have a million things to write about and to talk about. So yeah, our audience very much appreciates it, Yves. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. If you like what you heard, be sure to share the episode on your own social media feeds. You can also take a quick minute and give us a great review on whatever platform you're using to listen. Before we go, though, here is that folk song Yves referenced in his thank you letter. It's David Rovix with What's Going On Here, Montreal.
It's Dahlia Kurtz, it seems. She mainly likes to post lies about what's happening in Gaza, the Holocaust that she denies. Yves Engler is a journalist, and who knows why it is. He's been arrested for pointing out his feed is full of stuff like this. What's going on here, Montreal? It's anybody's guess. Seems the cops are taking orders from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, and they've come to imprison the press. Who is Dahlia Kurtz, and why is she coming up in my feed? When I go to her page on X, I too am outraged indeed. And that's what happened to Yves, and so he posted a reply. And now he's been arrested, and we'd like to know why. What's going on here, Montreal? It's anybody's guess. Seems the cops are taking orders from Jerusalem, and they've come to imprison the press. Who is Dahlia Kurtz? And who decided that we should see the horrid stuff she posts on the top of my feed? And when did freedom of speech get fed to the cats? And how many of you out there didn't think you lived in a country like that? What's going on here, Montreal? It's anybody's guess. Seems the cops are taking orders from Jerusalem, and they've come to imprison the press. What's going on here, Montreal? It's anybody's guess. Seems the cops are taking orders from Jerusalem, and they've come to imprison the press. Seems the cops are taking orders from Jerusalem, and they've come to imprison the press.
Until next time, keep disrupting.